Effects of radioactive pollution. Radioactive pollution has been an issue that has been around for many years. The effects of radioactive pollution are often not understood, and the severity of the impact can vary depending on who is exposed to it. This blog will go over what precisely radioactive contamination is and how it affects people's health and the environment. Effects of radioactive pollution on human health. Let's take a look at the radioactive pollution effects on human health. The problem of nuclear power is not new, but we are learning more and more about its dangers as time goes by. We understand that this issue has to be solved before it spreads further into our communities across the United States or even globally if nothing changes soon enough. Radioactive waste can cause severe illness with prolonged exposure, in some cases, death from cancerous tumors caused by leukemia, lung cancers, bone marrow diseases such as anemia or myelodysplastic syndrome, MDS, blood disorders like polycythemia vera erythroblastic form, which leads to hyperviscosity syndrome. Naturally occurring radiation gives us no protection against these types. Effects of radioactive pollution on ecosystem. What happens when radioactive contamination affects an ecosystem? Radioactive material is one of the most harmful substances on Earth. The effects it has on people and animals in direct contact with it are disastrous, but what about ecosystems as a whole? A study was done to see how radioactivity would affect plant life over time if left unchecked. It showed that plants' close proximity to areas where nuclear energy production occurs grew at high-speed rates. On average, these bacteria-loving bugs were increasing nearly 3 times faster than their counterparts who didn't live near any significant sources of radiation exposure. Some argue that radioactive pollution is not a big deal, but others disagree. The impact can vary based on factors such as location and time since exposure. Areas where surface water or groundwater has been contaminated will show signs in animals like abnormal birth rates, cancerous tumors, reduced growth rates and infertility. Radiation effects. These effects are also seen among plants. Their leaves turn brown, they produce bitter fruit instead of sweet fruit, flowers do not grow normally, blossom etc., leading to an overall decline in fertility for all organisms living there. The effect of radioactivity on plants and animals. There are other ways too by which nuclear fallout affects the ecosystem directly. It may cause mutations, including genetic changes due to radiation-induced chromosomal effects of radioactive pollution on animals. When animals are exposed to radioactive contamination, they face many of the same risks as humans. These include health issues such as cancer and congenital disabilities, which can affect them for generations after exposure has ended. Radiation is a silent killer that affects both people and animals in devastating ways. When it contaminates our water, soil or air, we risk developing severe physical ailments like cancer later on down the road. In some cases, radiation will mutate an animal's DNA causing offspring to be born with deformities, including arthrogryposis where their joints fail to develop normally, often leading to limbs not fully formed, making walking impossible without assistance from others. Radioactivity has a drastic effect on the animals it encounters. It causes mutations that can be deadly and leaves those in contact with radioactivity at risk for cancer even if they do not come into direct physical contact themselves. Effects of radioactive pollution on plants. Radioactive pollution has been shown to have a variety of effects on plants. It causes some species, such as lichens and mosses, not only to grow less but also be more sensitive in general. Additionally, it will affect the chemical composition of these organisms because they are no longer protected from radiation by their environment or other factors like soil quality for example, so this means that radioactive substances can absorb into them, making them more dangerous than before since there is now an increased danger present when directly consuming anything grown out of the contaminated ground/other surfaces too. Effects of radioactive pollution. Effects of radioactive pollution on aquatic life. The radioactivity from the nuclear disaster has a long-term effect on aquatic life. The fish have been contaminated, and they will not be safe to eat for some time. The radioactive water is affecting all of us in every way imaginable. It's making our skin dry out, and people don't want to swim at beaches or go fishing anymore either because what if there are other dangers lurking beneath these water? Water is a vital resource for living in the sea. With radioactive contamination, this becomes more and more difficult to maintain as these dangerous elements are absorbed by aquatic organisms such as plankton, which can then be eaten up by fish that we eat ourselves or other marine mammals like dolphins, seals etc. Posing health risks through bioaccumulation of radiation when they consume different prey from one another over time. It's not just about what happens at Fukushima, It's also about how far-reaching effects on our environment will continue to spread if nothing changes soon. Effects of radioactive pollution on agriculture. Radioactivity can cause a range of issues that affect crops, from minor effects like taste changes to more severe consequences such as decreased yields and toxicity. Radioactivity is a global threat to the food supply. But even with all of our technological advancements, there are still ways for it to get into agriculture and contaminate crops. In an article by Science News on how radioactive contamination affects agriculture, they mention how nuclear weapons tests in 1945 left radioactive material that can be found today across much of North America's surface land area. This was one example but not the only way radiation could infiltrate farmlands around the world had occurred through soil contaminated from industrial accidents or waste disposal sites such as the Chernobyl disaster site where 30 million people were affected when fallout landed on their farms because those areas had been cultivated already before contamination happened. Science News. There are many other regional examples, too, like after World War II. Effects of radioactive pollution on global warming. Radioactive materials like uranium and plutonium release radiation that can get into the air, water, or soil to contaminate it with high levels of radioactivity, making it unsafe to be in contact with these substances for long periods of time. Over a period as short as decades after being contaminated, one could experience things such as cancer rates increasing due to this exposure to hazardous elements. The issue at hand here isn't just climate change or global warming but how both affect us collectively and individually. Effects of radioactive pollution on climate change. There are events that can have sudden consequences for Earth like asteroid strikes. These could lead to dramatic changes such as extinction-level events causing mass extinctions of all life forms on this continent, or even other continents. In addition to asteroids striking us from space, nuclear power plant accidents also threaten human existence when they release radioactive material into our environment. Radioactive contamination effects include altering atmospheric conditions, making cloud droplets more minor, and carrying increased light intensity with them across large distances due to their increased surface area. The first studies about nuclear radiation's effect on climate change started in 1972 when the United States and the Soviet Union, both enemies during this time period, became aware of how their respective use of atomic weaponry could affect each other. It was not until 1982 that a joint study between American and Russian scientists found evidence for increased heating due to artificial radioactive particles released into the environment centuries earlier. One such release occurred after World War II with Operation Crossroads, which tested many different types of bombs at once near Bikini Atoll. One test used had an atmospheric blast yield equivalent to 23 kilotons of TNT explosives, roughly 330 times more potent than a conventional bomb. Effects of radioactive pollution on the economy. Radioactivity is devastating for the economy. The ability to produce goods and services decreases, which means production slows down as a result of less electricity being generated by nuclear power plants around the world. One seemingly small mistake can lead to an economic disaster on this scale. Radioactive contaminants from Fukushima shut down 3 nuclear reactors in Japan that require high-tech cooling systems. They need about 2 million gallons per minute but were only receiving 1/5 this amount. This caused these 3 outages announced last year alone, and currently, there are 6 more expected during 2019 despite plans already underway so far ahead, anticipating future needs better than ever before. Effects of radioactive pollution on the ozone layer. The release of radioactive gases into the air is a significant threat to our planet. Scientists at NASA say that this kind of pollution could be contributing to the increase in ozone depletion, which would have catastrophic consequences for life on Earth. Scientists from all over are coming together and working day and night diligently trying to find solutions so we can prevent these damages before it's too late. When the radioactive particles are released into the atmosphere, they can easily fall onto a country's land and contaminate crops. The air is then polluted with radiation that makes it difficult for beneficial UV rays to pass through in order to reach Earth's surface, which affects our ozone layer. Effects of radioactive pollution on acid rain. As the result of atomic bomb testing, radioactive substances have been released into our atmosphere. This has led to an increase in acid rain and a decrease in water quality for flying animals like birds over time. Scientists have studied this in the past and found that atmospheric nuclear weapons tests from the 1950s to 1970s caused a significant increase in acids, sulfuric acid-producing particulates, as well as nitric oxide ions, which are associated with an ozone depletion. The study also showed that there was an increased incidence of severe thunderstorms within 6 hours following these changes due to radioactivity affecting high levels of methane gas emissions at ground level. A new study has just been released on effects of radioactive pollution on acid rain by scientists all over North America using NASA data collected through satellites since 1988 to 1997, showing us information beyond our atmosphere, helping us understand what could happen if we don't find more ways for less pollution. Effects of radioactive pollution on non-living things. Radioactive pollution leaves a lasting and irreversible mark on the landscape. Radioactivity is released in small amounts from exploding stars or nuclear disasters. The radiation decays over time, but it never really disappears entirely because of this process, which can go on for trillions of years. Radioactivity comes to Earth when radioactive elements are blasted into space by either human error, i.e., Chernobyl, or natural events like stellar explosions and gamma-ray bursts that occur about once per second somewhere in our galaxy. It seeps through cracks deep inside Earth's crust before being absorbed by minerals near the surface, such as uranium ore, also known as pitchblende, where it behaves just like any other kind of mineral with one key difference: